remember things very vividly from a very young age. When I was a little kid, I actually spent a lot of time with my grandparents. My grandfather was a nuclear physicist. I remember he was telling me about black holes, and that terrified me.
I was like, that's just mind-boggling. It's a monster, right?
But at the same time, it fascinated me. And I said to myself, how do we know that? This unthinkably massive thing. I realized that nature doesn't keep secrets. It's only a matter of, do we understand? What tools can we use to expand our knowledge? And for me, dimethyltryptamine, also known as DMT, was the tool that led me to the discovery.
When I first saw the phenomenon, it was like, holy shit!
But then it was actually like, whoa, what is happening?
Am I losing my mind? But then I showed other people, and things kept getting weirder.
Just for the record, I haven't told him anything. Okay, just tell me what you see.
Oh my God, come on.
Wow, what the fuck? Holy shit. I just saw something. Yeah. What the fuck?
Oh, I see that. I feel it.
I've been under the influence of mind-altering substances a lot, but I've never seen anything like that. Whoa.
I showed over 100 people, and I kept asking myself, how are all of us seeing the same thing?
Oh my God. It changing shapes right there.
The laser was revealing numbers and letters running in a pattern.
They're almost like this big here, and it looks like code.
It looked like programming code.
It's definitely saying something, and I just want to take a picture of it and translate it.
Wow.
You see that?
Okay, so yeah, it's not stuck.
No.
It's not because of the light.
No, it's on its own side. Light is just literally revealing it.
And each angle shows you different layers, different ways through it.
I can see through the wall. It's not like a hallucination. It has spatial awareness and permanence.
I don't know. Whoa.
For centuries, mankind has attempted to explore these psychedelic, altered states, but we've never had a repeatable, testable phenomenon to observe until now.
Wow. I'm obsessed.
It's like you can see through the laser into another dimension.
I mean, like, take yourself to that. Like, I just made a connection that nobody made before, which is a simple connection. The claim is, if you project a diffracted laser on the surface and you smoke DMT, you will see code running in surfaces. Yes, like in the Matrix.
So there are a few possibilities. One,
I lost my mind, which is the coolest losing your mind ever in history.
the second option is that
this is the biggest discovery of humankind. If anybody ever asked themselves what it would be like to know you live in the Matrix for sure, well, I know for sure. I'm convinced.
So where do we go from here? All I know is
it's about to get crazy.
The answers you were never given. The place to seek the truth. Welcome to VERITAS.
Tonight on VERITAS, are we living inside a carefully crafted simulation? Suspend your disbelief as we explore a discovery that could reshape everything we think we know about reality itself. Our guest, filmmaker, entrepreneur, and psychonaut, Danny Goler, has pursued life's deepest mysteries with relentless passion. Since his youth, he has been captivated by the underlying structure of the universe. Now, he claims to have glimpsed the source code of existence through DMT and the unique lens of a 650 nanometer refractive laser, a profound revelation captured in The Discovery, his upcoming documentary. If you join me for my Sanitas interview with Dr. Rick Strassman, tonight's discussion elevates the conversation to an entirely new plane. Danny's findings suggest there may be a shared architecture beneath our reality, with over 100 participants consistently reporting visions of the same symbols, patterns, and even entities, an indication that DMT could be more than a personal experience. It may serve as a portal into a collective realm. Are these visions clues to a hidden order beneath what we perceive? A true Renaissance man, Danny has both physical and metaphysical prowess as a finalist on American Ninja Warrior, an artist and a champion of holistic development. Tonight, we probe the boundaries of perception, consider the notion of a psychosphere structured by recurring symbols, and question whether conventional science is even capable of comprehending the depth of Danny's findings. If this reality is a simulation, we ask, who or what might lie beyond? As Danny puts it, your brain is simulating what you're seeing right now. This is not what reality looks like. This is a very tiny sliver of what your brain constructs into what you think is the physical world. The simulation is not just occurring by the laws of physics, but that somebody is actually simulating it. Danny Goler is coming up next. Welcome to the VERITAS Project. I'm your host, Mel Hostelrick. If this is your first time listening, welcome home. To access tonight's full interview and all of our exclusive material, simply join the Veritas Plus family by clicking on the subscribe button at veritasproject.com. And while you're there, don't forget to check out the Veritas store for a range of great products, including focused life force energy. Experience the power of FLFE with a 15-day free trial today. No credit card required. If you're looking to get in touch with me, have a guest suggestion, or would like to provide feedback, simply click on the contact button on our website. Your thoughts and ideas are always appreciated. So sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's program. His website is codeofreality.com, and we also have links to his social media sites. And to help us crack the code of reality and unlock the blueprint of existence and the secrets of our simulated world, directly from, I presume, Southern California, I'd like to welcome Danny Goler. Hello, Danny, and welcome. How are you?
I'm doing amazing. Thank you so much for having me on. I think that was, I felt very important. When I start doing public talks, I should have you just come and introduce me on stage. That would be great.
By the way, you're in Southern California?
I am, yes.
What part?
Pasadena.
Okay, Pasadena. Sure, that's what I thought. Well, you've had a very interesting journey, and I told you before. Years ago, I interviewed Dr. Rick Strassman, and I've had many friends who are considered to be psychonauts, who are trying to get me into this, and I haven't done it yet. But Rick, he really convinced me. All the stories of all his, patients and what he did with DMT, the experiments, they were incredible. And ever since then, I've been looking for somebody to talk about this again, and I bumped into your future documentary titled The Discovery, and I was floored. So before you give me your background, can you tell the audience what they can expect from this upcoming documentary?
The documentary originally was supposed to be about the story of how the laser was discovered, all the ideas that I had about, how it can potentially work and all of that stuff. But then as we were filming, it became clear that we want to make the movie a lot more than that. And I think now the main working guideline is to try and make this movie as much as possible about humanity and where we're going and what is this thing that we're experiencing as this big shift really is versus all the ideas that people have about it. I would say that's a good summation of what the movie purports to be about.
Going back in time, I know that you spent a lot of time with your grandparents when you were growing up. And your grandfather, correct me if I'm wrong, but he was a physicist, correct?
He was, yes.
And you were asking me, he was telling you about black holes, and obviously if you're a kid, you think the black hole is going to swallow you. How did your conversation with that grandfather start, and how did he evolve into who you are today?
I think it was instrumental, and I think it was really the thing that formed who I am. If I didn't already come pre-built this way, but we all have some kind of a default mode, and sometimes it can be very specific, sometimes it can be more esoteric. Some people really care about relationships, other people care more about sports or technical things. For me, if I just sit down on the couch and stare into the ether, the thing that immediately springs into mind is what's outside of existence. I don't control it, I don't bring it about. I enjoy it, but that's where my brain goes automatically. And it has been this way since I can remember myself. All the way to the edges of reality, to what is this, why am I versus anything else. These questions, they were things that basically were operating in me since I was literally 4 years old, 3 years old, as far as I can recall. And my grandfather was definitely very instrumental in that, at least in encouraging that behavior, if not in maybe seeding it. And yes, I think the first recollection I have ever hearing something really interesting about physics was about black holes. I wasn't so worried about them swallowing me, but I was definitely mesmerized by the grandiosity of it, and how can this be? Just that phrase alone, like, how can this be, right? And how does it actually look like to look at one? And because I always try to imagine them more like giant quagmires, or enormous whirlpools in the middle of the ocean, the ones that you see in books where they swallow ships. I don't know what the biggest ones are called. I know that depending on the size, they call them different things. I don't know what the biggest ones are called, but that's what I try to imagine in my head. Like, does it look like that in space? Now, of course, we know they're spherical, and the event horizon is basically, it's a 3-dimensional hole. But back then, that was the main operative. And like with many things, the things that really terrify us, they also fascinate us. And I think that's what kindled my interest in more broadly thinking about reality as a thing that can be understood, and physics in particular. And in my early years, I got very interested in math and physics, and I was pretty good at it. And then I started going to university pretty early on the special program in which I was supposed to get my bachelor's degree a lot earlier. But then I made some other life choices. I had a pretty crazy childhood, and I not only dropped off academia, I just dropped off this whole anything that had to do with authority in general. Like, I had a big problem with authority, and it's only after the army that I realized that in order to truly bring myself to a more stable state as a person and heal and all of that stuff that people are very involved with today, I have to also make peace with, institutions and authorities, and understand what is the true value of humanity operating as a whole. Now, this is a much larger subject, but as far as my connection to my younger years and grandfather as a physicist, I think that's the main relevance. I think it really set the tone of what I'm really interested in. And ever since then, since I can recall, trying to understand reality and then later consciousness just animates my day-to-day behavior and movement more than anything else, no matter what else I do in life.
You said a few things that caught my attention. You said, I realized that nature doesn't keep secrets. And that for anybody who goes into a forest, who goes into Egypt or any fascinating place around the world, but when you go to nature, it doesn't keep secrets, but it wants you to discover. It's only a matter of, do we understand it? And isn't this what keeps us motivated to search the truth all the time?
That's the leaning out that we do. So just like in order to take a step forward, you have to fall a little bit every time. That I feel like that's the same gesture when we're trying to understand.
So what first drew you to, aside from your grandfather, the nuclear physicist, what first drew you toward the mysteries of consciousness and reality? And was there a specific experience or idea that set you on this path?
Specifically, what led to this discovery?
Yes.
Well, yeah, there was a set. Well, first of all, my relationship with psychedelics in general, and then more specifically, a set of experiences that I've had in later years with DMT that made me first question whether this can potentially not just be in my mind, and then realize without a shadow of a doubt that it can't possibly be just in my head, or what we call in my head. I know that nowadays even saying that is contentious somehow, but it's just the absolute understanding, and I don't want to say certainty because it's the wrong phrase. It's not like I had to be convinced. It's just that I think understanding works like long exposure. It doesn't work linearly, which is what a lot of people think. You never understand linearly. You understand like a long exposure to the stars. You open the shutter, you wait long enough stars appear, and then after a little while, a coherent picture emerges. And I think all understanding works that way. So at a certain point of interacting with the psychedelic space, it became very clear that there's just simply no way that this is just what we call mind-made. And I didn't quite know enough about the science involved at the time, but experientially, and I'm purposefully not using the word intuitively because I feel like that word actually downgrades somehow the conviction there. But experientially, it was clear to me that it must be the case. There was long enough of an exposure in which the information was coherent enough for me to say, okay, I understand. This cannot be just in the head. And I would say these two things were the pivotal. So if you want to draw a triangle, it would be my general interest in understanding reality to its deepest core, my interest in psychedelics in general, and fascination with them as a tool to observe certain things about our experience in the world. And then these sets of experiences that started happening that accompanied me for ever since, really, that were of a flavor that is so coherent as to just simply cannot belong in a family of what we call hallucinations or imagination, or it just couldn't be. And those three things, I think, led us to where we are today.
You had experience in diverse environments and cultures: Moscow, Russia, Israel, and now at the United States. Do you see traces of those experiences in your current work?
Culturally?
Yes.
No. I'm very what you call. I feel like this is a phrase that Alex Boehner used to describe his political orientation when he came on my podcast. He said, did he say orphan? I'm politically orphaned or something like that, politically homeless or something like that. And that's how I feel culturally as well. I'm trying to divorce myself from any cultural conviction as much as I possibly can. Of course, you can't fully do that because you're always expressing some set of meme plexes that of the culture that you're in. But no, I don't feel like I'm a Russian. I don't feel like I'm an Israeli. I feel like an American more than anything, but I think that's somewhat manufactured because I think anybody who made an effort to be here feels a certain amount of patriotism. So I think that psychologically maybe is the reason for that. But if I have to ask myself, like, what Russian operatives are in me? And if you want to say, well, maybe some stridence or rigidity, well, I actually think that these are more genetic. And I guess you can say, okay, but you were born in Russia, so that's Russian. But it's not cultural because I was too young when I left. Israeli, maybe a little bit of that, obviously, because Israelis, they have a very kind of like a direct attitude towards life. And maybe some of that, but I never really felt very comfortable culturally. And nowadays, Israel is under fire for a lot of different reasons. So just to make it clear to all the listeners that this is not any commentary on what Israel is as a whole. It's in the context of this insanity that's going on right now. Is just that culturally, I did not feel like I belonged, and so yeah. I know it's a long-winded answer, but I can't find any traces. In fact, if anything, I always try to make myself not culturally bound. People,
I guess I used a bad choice of words. What I really, I didn't. You didn't need to go there, but what I meant to say, for example, in China, people who are in China tell me, they do not believe in the paranormal. They do not believe in any superstition. I wanted to see.
I understood you. That's exactly what I meant. Yeah.
All right.
I meant to say that culturally, no cultural convictions that I can recognize is something that I picked up on and just kind of followed it because the culture is complacent with it or believes in it.
Well, expounding on the question then, how do you compare, say, Russia, Israel, and the United States when it comes to these topics that we're discussing?
Which specific topics?
The consciousness, DMT, hallucinogens,
I don't
source code.
That's exactly the beauty of it, that it floats free from any culture. They're universal. So just like science is universal, there's no such thing as Russian math or American math. There's just math, right? Because that's a universal
language,
domain.
Right?
Well, domain of knowledge, right? And this is a very relevant point and very dear to my heart, and one that I'm trying to bring forth also in the film to the extent that we can deliver it, which is that the way that I see it, the only way humanity can pass through this stage is to adhere to as many universal elements as possible. And then the conversation begins, what are they? Because some people think certain things are universal when in fact they're very parochial. They're very, very immediate environment-like. They're not universally bound. People might believe they are, but they're not. And I think that's the important part. This is why science is such a great unifier, because if we want to go to space, I don't care what you believe might be the case about certain things. Certain things either work or don't, and that's just a universal thing. And I see the project that I'm involved with along those lines. So I completely see how what we see in the DMT space is universally true. And obviously, I'm not the first one to postulate this. This is a very, at this point, robust and growing field of study. And there's definitely a debate whether to what degree, we can call that space real in the sense that it's there even when we're not looking. My conviction is that it's absolutely real, even when we're not looking. And it is just as universal as quasars and stars and the speed of light or anything that we call physical and real. And we should investigate it as such. So in that sense, from the simplest way of interacting with just as an observation, I think you should always talk about it in terms of like objective reality. And I do think that trend ultimately will influence whether a civilization like our own makes it through this whatever barrier we're actually passing through. Specifically, this negation of unification in general seems to be a very common one now. In politics, you see it obviously very clearly because people pointing fingers, but that was always the case. Now it's just exacerbated. But you see it even in kind of subcultural milieus. You can see different people expressing, even under the banner of expressing positive things, they seem to always pick something that they speak against. So I talk about this a lot in my live, but even people that you would consider, like having the holistic approach or the spiritual approach, the ones that talk about connecting back to nature, to ourselves, to each other, which are beautiful visions. I'm all for it. But in the same breath, you can feel that there's a disdain to progress in science. There's this like weird feeling of like, this is artificial. And which of course is completely incoherent because it's part of the natural course of things. And it's essentially saying, well, we're special. This is it. As if somehow evolution stops with us. And this, I think, unwillingness to grapple with the fact that we're evolving by grabbing on to everything we knew under the banner of saying all the beautiful things about connecting to the universal. So you would, the people like that cast it towards what we call the divine or the higher self or God, which again, they're beautiful visions. But if these visions come coupled to negation of something else, which clearly is also part of creation and everything that's going on, it can never succeed, to my mind. It has to be a fully unified attitude where you don't vilify anything. You say, okay, well, science is beautiful. How do we make it more beautiful? How do we make it so it doesn't do things that temper with our immediate environment for our own sake and for the biosphere's sake? That's the right question. It's not how do you get off this ride? It's not a ride, it's evolution. As long as there's these two sharp of vectors pointing in the direction of the other, you cannot cohere enough to rise to a high enough of a level to actually become the next level of whatever we're experiencing. So I do think I do see these universal elements as key in every way, and that's why I try my best to find what are these universal principles that are operating in this situation, including, by the way, everything that has to do with consciousness and how DMT connects to what we call physical matter. Is it just a larger space of where what we call our minds resides? Or is it somehow a completely adjacent space and our minds are interacting alongside of it? These are real questions. And I think that these questions need to be asked in a serious manner, not just when we sit around a campfire and smoke a joint.
But don't you think that science today has become very dogmatic? They don't like to be questioned, and science is supposed to be questioned. And, when you think about the ancient ones, even right now, elders around the world, shamans, the practice of, ayahuasca and DMT and the rest of it, it's something that I think most people, and I haven't done it, most people should experience. Everyone that I know who has experienced this is smart, successful. They're not committing any crimes. Why do you think society frowns upon these practices?
So first, I would be very careful and I would make the distinction between dogmatic and rigid. These are very big differences. Dogmatic means we believe this no matter what, and we're putting that at front and center as one of our values. That's what dogma is. So we're saying openly that we will not revise our thinking no matter what. That's dogma. That is definitely not what's happening with science. You can say that science became a little bit more rigid in some ways, and I would agree with some of that. But that's the nature of any institution that has been doing something for long enough and stopped revising and questioning the reasons of doing these things. And it's exacerbated by the fact that, just like everything else in our modern world, is run by economic incentives, which is the larger machinery within which the enterprise of science is embedded in. So these are big, difficult challenges to solve, but they're not insurmountable. And I think that actually, and I'm not saying that this is something that, it sounds like everything you're saying is in real, very in good faith. But I do feel that there is a tendency here from this kind of rhetoric to obfuscate the fact that actually, no, there's no comparison here between what we call dogma and, what science does. Science is our only way out. And I want to then expand and say that when I say science, I mean the enterprise of human understanding, full stop. That's what science is in its totality. Capital S science, the way that I see it, universally, what science is the enterprise of understanding. And that should include all modalities of understanding, which means it should include all the shamanic traditions. It should include all the spiritual traditions, because they are the science of inward looking. They're the science of the personal space. Science is just observing something, understanding the patterns that it operates in, and then seeing if you can do something with it or understand something better from it and create a better world. Now, this last part, obviously, many would claim, well, that's already not how we define science. That's already, a personal, ethical question. Well, I actually think that should also be part of understanding, because the trajectory of possible spaces of what to do next is not infinite. It's large, but it's not infinite. And there are better or worse choices you can make. And you can look at that also as a scientific endeavor. So everything you mentioned, the openness to investigate inner worlds and trying to understand how they map onto what we call the physical world, that's all should be part of larger science. So in that sense, I think that's still the only way forward. Or to put it in a lot less words and much more succinctly and beautifully, because Terence McKenna was a master at that, he said, even if we're suspecting science as not being the most honest player, nevertheless, we should never get rid of common sense.
I agree with you, but at the same time, I'm going to go back to dogma for a moment. I totally agree.
If you want to give me an example, I would love to.
I'll give you an example. Yeah. Peer review. Sure. That's just one. I mean, institutional structures, public perception, even though that might not be reality to some people, the perception is that there's a cognitive bias. But peer review is a good example. Don't you think that it favors conventional wisdom over innovation or controversial research such as what you're doing?
Sure, but that is a truth of any system that has a momentum and it's trying to keep going with that momentum. That's not dogma. Do you want me to expand on that, or?
Please expound, because again, I'm not saying that it's dogma per se, but it feels like it when they don't like to be questioned. Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely, because science is there to be questioned. So it's very
exactly.
important. Yeah, because it's very important, because I think that really is kind of like one of the biggest dangers. The way that I see it, and again, I'm aware that for some reason in this environment, because I do talk to people every single day, it does seem like a contentious point for people. And in the beginning, it was confusing to me. But then I realized that, confusing or not, that's the truth about how people perceive things. And you have to grapple with that. So, but the reason I'm saying all that is because I still believe that the true way out is that, and there's no other way. And I'll explain why. So, there are a lot of different things you can do in any given moment. If you just sit here and you have amnesia and you don't think about anything and you don't know anything aside from the fact that you just all of a sudden came into being somehow, let's say that all your, mental faculties of knowing how to walk and think and all that is intact, then the immediate investigation starts from very concrete elements of the world, like, where can I go? Where I can't go? There's a wall. I can't walk through that. Here's a person. If I make these faces, they react this way. If I make these other faces, they react another way. This gets me in trouble. This doesn't get me in trouble. Here, I get hurt. So it's like, it's very, it's all the stuff that evolution essentially investigated throughout the entirety of the 4.5 billion years or somewhat that existed on Earth. And at a certain point, you reach a level of cognition where you start interacting with degrees of freedom that are much more than what just the immediate environment throws at you. And there you start playing with an interesting territory, because you start interacting with conceptual frameworks that don't necessarily immediately translate to what you can either gain or do. They involve some other element. But when you look closer, you start to understand that all of these things that happen to you experientially, they're all part of some kind of a map that is unfolding in some way by some rules, always. It's easy to lose this understanding of what we're actually trying to do in the enterprise of knowledge in general, and to confuse that with some ideas that exist in an institution, like a scientific institution as a whole, that have certain incentives even if these incentives are very, very robust and very rigid, this is what I mean by rigidity, right? So if, for example, you're telling me that science right now, peer reviewed, they only can accept, I don't know if you're specifically alluding to what the whole Terrence Howard and the way that Eric Weinstein was talking to him and, Neil deGrasse Tyson responded. I don't know if you're alluding to something like that. But in general, there are certain truths that are just there, and it doesn't matter who you are, what you are, it doesn't care. So I don't know where you fall in this space of operative memes, but no, one times one is one. And it's a matter of definition, with the way we define these languages and what they mean, right? So this mistrust that people have in the scientific enterprise is the one that is actually completely misplaced. Because it's the one domain where if you understand, you just understand. And if you want to bring it forth to the scientific community, to something to chew on, then you start interacting with the cultural part of science, which you're right. It has a lot of these factors that seem to be at this point kind of like a closed club that is not necessarily open to just what anybody thinks. But that was always the case. It was always the case that in order to interact with these very complex things, you have to understand a thing or two. It's exemplified by something that Sean Carroll recently said on the TOE podcast, Theories of Everything podcast. Kurt Jaimungal, the host, he asked him, what do you think about this whole Terrence Howard conundrum? And he said something that I think should have been obvious to everybody right away. And nobody ever said it in this whole back and forth that happened. He said, well, wait a second. So he's an actor, right? Yes. Okay. So he enters my domain. That I'm a physicist. That's what I do for a living. That in my whole life, I wrote many, many papers. I'm a public educator, right? So you asking me, go and read this one paper or one body of knowledge that somebody produced. When you listen to Terrence talk for 2 seconds, not even 5 minutes, and read anything that he wrote, you realize he actually didn't do any of the work of understanding what exists in that space first. He just kind of bring he's like, hey, here's an idea. So it's like, okay, well, first you have to show me that you understand what we're talking about. And if you can, then I have a reason to listen to you and say, okay, now explain to me why you think everything we think is wrong and in what way. But if you're not doing that, all you're doing is saying, I don't trust you. And you can say, listen, it's understandable. Okay, that's fine. That's a psychological, cultural conversation, not a conversation about knowledge. Knowledge doesn't have this quality. It has some malleability. It has some flexibility where you can say we know certain things to certain degrees of certainty and other things with less degree of certainty, of course. But it doesn't belong in the same category of, well, I think that doesn't matter. Like something you can either walk through the wall or you can't. That's the nature of that environment. So the reason I gave you this example with just sitting here and then going all the way to these like very complex things is because the more we departed further and further away from what is in our immediate environment and moment, as the things we interact with in our minds, the harder it becomes to see the fact that actually knowledge is the one domain where it's, if you're stuck very deep underwater, deep divers, what they do, they always have that one rope, right? That if something goes wrong, they can always kind of follow the rope, right? It's a rope because it's tethered to something that is real. And for people at this point, somehow there was this weird full circle meme war that ended on a weird spot where people say, I don't even know what that means. I don't think there is such a thing as real. That is the danger. Because if it's all up for whatever you think in that moment, you have no reason to agree on anything. You can think of anybody as your enemy or somebody who's trying to, slide you or do whatever. Especially in an environment where things get tense, you need that one rope that everybody can grab and agree that there's a rope there. So I fully agree with you that science needs to loosen up the way they do things in certain domains and to allow more of the public to weigh in on certain things that the public can. I agree with that fully. I mean, the nature of my discovery is such that you need a lot of people to kind of talk about it in a coherent manner. And I'm on record saying this a lot, where up until a certain point, this idea exchange that we're doing with one another is essentially note-taking on a global scale. But at some point, you do want to put it through the official scientific machine that will throw all the possible tools that it has on it, so we can establish certain things in it. But until a certain point, the public can definitely participate more in it, without a doubt. But if you wouldn't have this larger body of, and by the way, this level of rigidity to certain ideas, you would not trust getting into an airplane. You would not trust buildings. The reason that they are that safe at this point is because there's this rigidity of understanding that does not compromise just because somebody felt different about the subject. I don't care how the architect feels. There's certain things that will lead to a disaster and other things that won't. And we want to always remember that even though we are the painters of this universe, we nevertheless still exist in a world that does have a certain amount of rigidity in some operational levels that we want to understand, versus just fly blind and pretend like we know everything. Does that make sense to you? Or?
Well, it does. And I'm remembering of my late uncle, who was an engineer, who taught me a lot of the math that I know. And I asked him, why did you choose engineering? And he simply said, because that's an exact science. I like exact science. But you brought up Terrence Howard. I'm thinking of Alan Watts. I'm thinking of Terrence McKenna. People who at one point in their lives faced the scientific community. But let's just, for the people who don't know who Terrence Howard is, great actor. And all of a sudden, he's taking the world by storm by his versions of mathematics and physics, especially the dimensionality. But when he presented his ideas, he faced a lot of skepticism and pushback from the scientific community. And instead of engaging with him and his theories, many dismiss his concepts outright. And this reaction illustrates, in my opinion, how science can sometimes protect its established beliefs.
No, it represents a very simple understanding of the subject matter.
But doesn't that feel dogmatic at times?
No. If you walk in that, listen, you said your uncle was an engineer, right?
Right.
What kind of an engineer?
Chemical.
Great. So chemical engineering, chemical engineering has a lot more fluidity to it, literally. But there's it's going to be a lot less salient to people. So let's say, I like to use the example of architects because it influences a lot of people and it's very concrete, right? So they used to build things by rule of thumb, and there was somebody who's the village expert and then the city's expert and then whatever, before we develop mathematical tools to understand why certain angles support beams in a certain way and all of that stuff, right? Weight distribution, all of this. And the rules of thumb worked. And then you had to go to an expert because they were the only person in town who kind of had the lifelong experience of kind of knowing intuitively what would work, what wouldn't. But they didn't quite know why. They knew that in general this works. That's a rule of thumb. Okay. And you had a lot more accidents because rules of thumb are not that accurate. And if you're an expert, the world's biggest, one of the world's biggest architects, and you have some guy who comes along like Terrence Howard, and he goes on Joe Rogan, and he goes, "Hey, I actually have a much better way to build a building," and he presents this whole formula that just on the surface of it, you don't need to go deep, like it's right on the surface. It's like, well, actually, if you put a beam, if you just put it to the ceiling like this, like you take this plank and you just glue it to the ceiling like this, and if you put it in the middle of the room, then it will just stick like this. Now, I'm giving this like an extremely absurd example just to illustrate to you how clear it is that what he's saying is wrong, right? It's not that it's somewhere that you have to kind of understand and go deep. The illusion there is that when there's smoke, there's fire, which is not true. You have a very big show like Joe Rogan. That's the only reason it got attention, right? But I think that what was amazing about this case is what it illustrated about society as a whole at the moment, which is that most people who are technically minded, not even, I'm not talking about like scientists out there, but just the people who are like a little technically minded, everybody immediately understood is like, this is hilarious, right? And then the next day, people were like, oh my God, they discovered this. And then everybody who just see that you can't put a beam float in the air, and everybody going like, dude, he rediscovered the beam thing. You can put it in the thing and it will just float. And then you start going, wait, what? What are you talking about? And then the more people repeat it, everybody like, yeah, I totally. And then you start feeling like literally the world lost their minds.
Well, but that's a different story. I'm totally in agreement with you.
It's the same. It's the same.
I'm in agreement with you.
1 times 1 equals 2 is the same as the plank hovering in the air.
Correct.
Right. So the second you base everything around that, which later he, of course, pedaled back a lot and said, well, it was a metaphor, which definitely he did not say in the beginning, right? The point is not, like, Terrence Howard is wrong, full stop. It's okay to say. There's nothing wrong with that, at least about that stuff, for sure, right? So now, it's not up for debate, is my point. There's certain things that are not up for debate. So if I'm telling you, well, that's just wrong, I'm not shutting you down. I'm saying, well, I'm not going to build anything with this thing that you're saying because I know, first of all, it's impossible. But let's say you would say something that sounds a little bit more plausible, like put a plank somewhere that now you can remove all the support beams. Like something is truly dangerous, right? It's like, well, if you put this thing here, this tiny plank, and you can remove all the support beams. No reason for it. Doesn't make any sense. You don't have to be an expert to understand that that can't possibly be true because we live in a certain space that has certain parameters to it. And then everybody running with it is like, totally. And then at a certain point, you go, whoa, hold on. I want to make sure that nobody tries to build a building like this. Then you start weighing in on it. And now what you see is the reaction, which is a very natural one, that when something gets big enough, with the potential to skew certain levels of thinking to a level where it can be dangerous, yeah, you're going to have experts going, hold on, this is why this is wrong. And if you're talking about, the exchange of ideas, that's where that idea ends. Unless you can fully demonstrate how it is actually functional. And he definitely didn't do that because he can't. It just doesn't work. But the point there is, to me, what became interesting later, because I also had a lot of very close friends who kind of did the same thing. They, started sharing this like, oh my God. And I was truly just flabbergasted by what was going on. But then at a certain point, you have to wonder, what is actually happening here? And what became interesting to me at that point is, what is culturally happening here that this is possible? And I realized that there's something else that is happening right now culturally where people, there's two things that I've identified. One, people are thirsty for something new and innovative. They want something amazing to happen. That I think we can say with very high level of confidence is going on. Like people truly are ready for something enormous to change because things are just they don't feel great. And I think we would all agree on that. The second thing that I identified as operative here is that people genuinely don't know as much about some very basic technical things that they absolutely should. And if anybody ever asks themselves, well, why do I need to learn math in school? I will never use it in my job. That's why. Because you're a node on a system that relies on these things to operate as a society. Some people believe that we should just move back to villages, and that's a whole separate conversation. But if you don't believe that, then the reason that it matters that you understand some basic things in mathematics and in STEM in general is because even if you're never going to do anything with it on the day-to-day basis, knowing that 1 times 1 can't possibly be 2 and why would eliminate this entire cultural weird sideline from common sense. It really doesn't need to be there because it sparks a whole new domain of false conviction about the world that, if taken to the limit, can be the end of civilization. And I'm not joking, because you're going to have a lot of people that are trying all kinds of things that have nothing to do with what's possible, at least in the current moment. And the way they're going about trying to figure out how it can be possible is decoupled from what the territory is. If you have the wrong map, you're going to drive off a cliff eventually. So this seemingly innocuous, just like, what do you care? Let him express his opinion. Well, he reached millions of people, convinced many of them that something is going on here when nothing is going on. And that is actually damaging to society. I will say, however, that I did come out from the conversation that he had with Eric Weinstein later, understanding that, first of all, he's a good guy. He really is trying to understand. And he just didn't know how to make himself heard, and it was frustrating to him. But and I hope also what happened, which I thought I saw, but I don't know if that really ran through. But I hope that what I saw was to some degree true, which is that he realized also that he actually have to start to try and understand these things a little bit more, if he wants to contribute. So my point is simple: like saying that you are wrong about something in a domain that I know a lot about, and also explaining to you why, that's not dogmatic. They're just telling you, well, this thing you're trying to describe is just not correct. Calling it dogmatic is the dogmatic move, because you're saying you're not allowed to say that I'm wrong. Otherwise, I'm gonna call you a name, and I'm gonna box you as that thing, and essentially, it's like a witch hunt in reverse. It's like, you can't criticize me because that's my opinion and that's it. Well, some domains are not like that. It's not a matter of opinion.
Well, that's what I'm saying. What I mean to say, for example, you're mentioning an architect or an engineer. They stand in front of their building that they just opened to the public in Manhattan, for example. And another person comes and says, by the way, I can make this last longer, harder, like an ancient cathedral, and 20 more stories. And they say, no, that's impossible.
No, they don't say it's impossible.
No, hold on. I just give you an example. But some people in academia, for example, they say, no, it's impossible, but they don't even let you prove them. Let me prove to you that you're wrong. That's my point.
So why don't you just prove them?
Well, some people want to prove them wrong, but some people in academia close that door and they completely say peer review says that this is impossible. The consensus versus inquiry. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that it is dogmatic per se, but it behaves as such sometimes.
So we're saying the same thing, but I'm failing to understand your example, because there's no equivalence between what you just described and what's going on here. So if a scientist tells you, I don't want to look at this, that's it. They're not going and talking to some management. Hey, this guy, don't let him in. Like, that's not happening. Is it the scientist is like, I don't want to put my attention on this. End of story. If you want to prove something, you're more than free to do whatever you want. So if you're coming to me and you're saying, hey, I have these beams and they can do this amazing things, great. Go to China, go to here in the US if you want to do, like good old Americana industry and grow the economy. Hire somebody who knows how to do these, hardening the wood in the way that you wanted. Do all of that. By the way, he has money, right? So if you have the right idea, the idea either leads to something that works or it doesn't lead to something that works. And that depends on the amount of actual knowledge that is in it. There is no some evil cabal of scientists who whisper behind society's ear and deciding to do things behind people's backs. That perception is the corrosive part. On my live, sometimes I have people that come on and talk like that. And one time I actually didn't think it's going to yield any fruit. I just kind of asked, I don't even know why I asked, but I'm glad I did. I said, hey, do you know any scientists? And that person was actually very forthcoming and very friendly. And they said, no. I said, oh, I think you should befriend a few scientists. And it's not that difficult. So like find a meetup or something in which people like meet up around what particular thing and see if you can like join in, or you should meet some scientists. They tend to be the most wholesome people you will ever meet. They're literally just trying to understand the world. You, of course, have scientists who are also business people who understand, they have other incentives. Sure, of course, there's all kinds of people. But for the most part, like the scientist, that archetype is just a person who's really curious and wants to understand the world. That's all. And if they devoted 30 years of their lives to understand truly the mind-bogglingly confusing and difficult things to do. It takes a lifetime to understand. And somebody comes on, they read a couple of articles, they memorize some buzzwords, and then they regurgitate these words in a string of lack of coherence that just doesn't mean anything. Truly doesn't mean anything. And this is not speaking out of like some kind of a vitriol towards Terrence. I truly listen. I listened to the whole thing. I watched the whole thing. It doesn't mean anything. Or at least he's doing zero work in trying to engage with the listener. So when I'm talking to you right now, there's some kind of a miscommunication here, because I hear a very positive person. You're coming from a real place. You have your convictions and you have your ideas, and I have mine. We're trying to come to some kind of an agreement. So there's a back and forth. So when I feel where I disagree with you, I'm trying to outline my side of it. I'm saying, well, here's how I see it. And then if you repeat the same thing to me, I'm like, okay, wait a second. So if you misunderstood, I'm trying to project myself to a potentially shared space with you. And I'm saying, okay, where are we missing each other? Hold on. What can it be? There's something that we either talking cross frames or something is miscommunicating, right? And there is an answer, by the way. That's the beauty of it. And you can find it, but you can never find it if you're not trying to do that. If I would just be, this is why just a small sidestep. This is why I'm really I don't want to say the negative part of it. I'm practicing not saying the negative part of it. So I'm not a big fan of people who do debunking. Because debunking, by nature, you're looking for the wrongness in somebody's something, argument, whatever it is. Your attitude, your entire modality is there to squash or break or show in a negative light somebody else's ideas or attitudes or whatever it is. When you're coming from that place, the chances that you will truly understand where the other person comes from, there's zero. There's no way. Okay? The only way to do that is if both individuals are truly locked and really trying to understand each other versus just defending their ideas. In Terrence Howard's case, I know that it seems like he's David and science is the Goliath, so it's easy to identify with him. But if you just for a second try and look at it from a more neutral perspective, I think you will see that he's doing none of the attempt to understand the other side that needs to listen to him do this. And that's an important part. If you're not showing me that you're an honest interlocutor, if you're not showing me that you're truly trying to understand me, and in everything that you're saying, we're like, well, actually, this and this and this. Or we're like, well, actually, everything you just said was already debunked in 1990. And then you give me some obscure name of some obscure paper. It's like, you're not trying to understand me. And then the need to try and understand you is immediately extinguished. And it doesn't matter if you're an individual talking to another individual or an individual talking to a community, especially when you're talking to a community because it's faceless and the community can very easily ignore you without making any extra effort. If you truly want to be understood, instead of just being loud and noticed, you have to do the work of first showing that you understand what are the convictions in that domain that you're speaking to. And if I'm speaking to a domain that I truly don't understand, the first thing I have to do is to be fully transparent about my ignorance and the level of it in that domain. I will automatically open a channel. I will say, hey, listen, here's what I really think, okay? And I know that I will find the things out the closest to what I believe what I'm saying is. And I say, I know you have this conviction and this conviction and this conviction. I'm aware of it existing. So already I'm showing that I did some work to understand where you are. So you don't have to re-educate me the whole way. And then I go, well, but I believe that this fits here because A, B, C, D, D. That's a way to have a conversation. But if you're coming in, everything you guys believe, talking about the smartest people to ever live, okay? Nonsense. Let me show you. Who's going to listen to you? And why? And that's not weird. So it's not dogma. It's just a reaction to a very particular attitude that is quite frankly obnoxious. And it's very condescending while at the same time being very ignorant. That is a terrible combination. So as much as a lot of people see a hero in Terrence Howard because they want to also speak truth to power, Terrence was not speaking nor truth, not to power. Scientists, just people trying to understand the world, and you entering their world. So the minimum you can do is to try and show that you actually understand what they're doing. And again, this is difficult to do because, in the conversation with Joe Rogan in the first one, he said things like, Richard Feynman, just all of these squiggles, he tried to put it into pictures as like, Richard Feynman was one of the smartest people to have ever walked the face of the earth. Okay? And he was an extremely humble person. He was very animated, and he was actually a lot of people kind of, nowadays attack his like bravado and kind of like his very a charming manhood. But he was a very humble person in the sense that he knew how much he did not understand, even though with his level of knowledge. And yes, these things require a certain amount of brain power. And it's not to say that people like Terrence Howard can't understand it. Of course he can, if he would actually try. That's my point. He never tried. And every word that he spoke or tried to speak on the subject demonstrated that he did not try. He does not know what he's talking about. Not in like a, I'm not saying it's like one of these lines that you're supposed to cancel somebody's predispositions. I'm saying it truly for what the phrase means. Like, he does not understand what he is talking about. What he's saying, he doesn't understand it, or how it connects to the rest of the stuff. That was my impression of that.
Let me give you more context. And by the way, I appreciate the back and forth, and I'm not interested in debunking at all. No,
not you. I'm actually saying the other way. Like, I would probably agree with you. On a lot of people that on the scientific side are pretty obnoxious. I was saying it to that effect, that probably you will find a comrade in me, funny enough, word from the Russian thing, but like you would probably find definitely a brother in arm in me talking about certain people that are very scientifically minded who are obnoxious. And I would agree with you. That should not be the way to talk to anybody, because we should always try and understand each other. But in this case, uncomfortably, it is true, Terrence was that guy.
Well, one example. The late Dr. Paul Laviolette.
When he was canceling the thought of the biggest geniuses in history without even knowing how to pronounce their name.
And because he was in a platform that most people would think, must be true if he's at Joe Rogan's. But like, give you an example of Dr. Paul Laviolette. He passed away a few years ago. He was a theoretical and applied physics PhD. He focused on advanced propulsion systems. So he knew what he was talking about.
Sure.
He came on this show many times and explained that he was trying to file a patent to electrify the wings of commercial airliners to save between 40 and 50% of fuel. He went to the patent office. He was shut down every single time because of national security. He went to several universities, and the same thing. One honest professor told him, we cannot take this, because if we do, the funding for certain areas of our university will stop. This is what I'm talking about. When I say dogmatic, I say tongue-in-cheek, to protect some interest behind the scenes. That's what it really meant.
So it's hard for me to comment on things like this because the amount of details here is enormous, right? So it's like there's so many things here that can explain this easily. Maybe not. I'm not saying it has to, but there's so many things here that, one honest professor, that's already like, is that what he told you? Because it's not like...
No, that was my deduction. He never said I'm an honest professor. I interacted with him enough.
So let me try and pull the thread that I think is the most relevant to how I think about cases like these. If I would really have to comment on this, I would have to go and look at the actual details of what he was proposing. Okay. And also, the second you said somebody told him national security, maybe this thing already exists and they can't put it in any patents because the American government wants to keep it a secret from enemies. but so they won't be able to go through the patent office and find out that somebody already thought about that.
Well, that's one of many examples of other people
But then it already exists, right? In that case, you don't have to worry about, because then it already exists. The government just wants to have ownership of it, and then we can have a separate conversation whether a government should ever have the right to do that. But that's a separate conversation. That's not science. Now, the other part of it is, if he really wants to just put it out in the world, and he saw that everything already failed and he couldn't go to the patent office. The only reason you go to the patent office is that you want to be the sole proprietor of that idea for a while. So you want to make money, right?
Oh, he actually went to airline to see to 4 different CEOs of the major airlines.
Okay.
And they all said, we're not interested.
Okay, so because the thought is why it's going to save fuel, so the fuel companies are the lobbyists. They basically block ideas like that. Is that the thought?
Well, why did they say no?
I don't know.
But we don't know, right? But the paradigm, or people who have had a perpetual motion machine that went to the patent office, same thing happened.
Do you understand that these things are basically? This is where it gets dicey, because this is where you actually do have to get a little bit more technical and understand why, at least on the surface of it, at the moment, we understand not from an engineering perspective, but from a fundamental physics perspective, why that is technically impossible. Or we have to rewrite everything we understand about physics. So now, is it possible to get to something that is getting close? Maybe. I'm sure there's, and by the way, I'm not even against the idea that we're going to find a way to bend the laws of physics. But when you're saying things like perpetual machine was offered and nobody wanted anything to do with it, what you just said is that everything we know about physics is wrong, and then somebody discovered it, and the patent office is ignoring it. If you could discover that perpetual motion machine is possible, all you have to do is to literally just like bring it to me. I'm going to put it on my channel. I'm pretty good at describing things and convincing people. I'm going to show you exactly how it works. And this is going to explode like that overnight. If you can actually verify this. And then if the conversation is about, well, they're afraid for their lives, I'm like, okay, that's no. But with what I'm saying, okay, do you know how many people emailed me throughout the years, be careful, this, Men in Black, blah, 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 blah. What most people don't understand is that all of these like shadowy organizations, they, of course, doing a lot of things that we don't know about. Absolutely. They have technologies that we don't know about. But the more we advance into a world where these things become more and more available for us to interact with, like in open channels of knowledge, the gap between where you thought some, secret government organization might have the technology above what we have today shrinks, because the pace of change is so rapid, is so quick, that nobody can actually predict what's going to be here. So if 30 years ago, you could postulate that maybe the government has something that will be like 10 years more advanced than what should technically be possible now. Now, to think that the government or any shadowy organization has anything that is maybe above what is possible maybe a year or two from now is untenable. Like, it is just not a real thing, because the amount of information that is required to predict what that thing might be is so enormous that there's not enough computational power in the world to do so, let alone people thinking about it. So the point of this is that there's actually a lot less mystery where people think there is, and a lot more mystery where people never think about looking. And that seems to almost be a universal rule. If most people are pointing there, you can be almost statistically certain that it's not there. That's like a really good rule of thumb. And because we are the herd, so to speak, it's always easier to think about, oh, no, that's us. We figured it, like, we're pointing in the right direction. Chances are, it's exactly the opposite. And where people are not looking is where usually all the biggest breakthroughs are actually happening. And when you look at the possibility of somebody blocking a technology because of something that can potentially be harmful to a very big organization like the oil industry, of course, makes perfect sense. But with now what exists today, literally go to like 5 big YouTubers, all anti-establishment. There's so many of them today, right? Throw it on all these channels. Who can stop it? Who can stop it? It's going to spread like wildfire. Why was that not done? See what I mean? Like, the ideas are not, and I just thought of it in 5 minutes. How many more brilliant ideas of how to put this information out there you can think, especially if you're somebody who's even a lot smarter than myself and thinking about these things your whole life. How hard is it for you to put it to the public domain if you're really interested in that? Now, if you're interested in just monetizing it, and by the way, I have no problem with that. But okay, but then you should admit you're playing the same game. Somebody just beat you to it. So which one is it? Because if it's just for the world, just go and put it. There's so many channels that will be happy to have you that have nothing to do with science, but they're enormous platforms. Joe Rogan is one example. There's so many others, right? So it just doesn't. It just doesn't add up with the amount of things that are actually available nowadays.
By the way, we have to take a one and only break for the second hour. We haven't discussed the experiment, which is the pivotal point of this interview, which is incredible what you were about to tell us. But just one last thing before we continue. And I appreciate the discussion that we're having. But just like you said, there's nothing wrong by monetizing something, or if it's patent, it denotes that you want to make a profit. But then you have people like Stanley Meyer and the water cell car, the hydrogen generation. He publicly demonstrated it. He did not want to patent it. In fact, he wanted to send it out there for everybody to use. And
what is the name? Sorry,
Stanley Meyer.
Stanley Meyer.
And then he was offered a lot of money. He refused.
Oh, yeah, that's actually what I was about to mention this next. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, well, let's go back. When we come back from the break, we'll discuss this because he publicly demonstrated it. He wanted the public to use this. He didn't want to charge anybody.
Literally, the next sentence of my mouth was, that being said, there are cases that I'm familiar with, and I was about to mention this case, and I didn't remember what his name was, but literally that's what was on the forefront of my mind when you said that.
Well, so tell us once again, how come the documentary, when is it coming out? Because a lot of people are emailing me and I told them it's not ready yet.
No. It's like I keep repeating it. It's a funding thing, and we do have a couple of potential people who want to help us fund this. If everything closes perfectly, then we should be able to deliver something within 6 months, maybe 8 months. If we see that we have to keep bootstrapping the whole thing and just do it whenever we can when we have free time, then it's just longer, but it will be out. So I would say best case scenario 6 months, worst case scenario a little bit over a year, somewhere about there.
How can people learn more about your work, websites, and your social media links?
Yeah, my most the thing I'm promoting the most is my YouTube channel, which is Dango Thoughts, DANGO Thoughts. And we have a website that has to do with the project, which is just more public facing for people to understand what we're doing, which is codeofreality.com. And all the rest of it is TikTok, and Instagram is Danny Goler, just one word, and X is Goler Danny.
Excellent. One more hour to come.
Sure.
Deep dive with Danny Goler. This is Mel Hostelrick, and you are listening to Veritas. Don't go anywhere. Thank you for listening to the first part of this important Veritas episode. To listen to the rest and access all of our exclusive material, head over to the Veritas Plus member section or click the subscribe button at veritasproject.com. Don't forget to visit the Veritas store for a range of great products, including focused life force energy. Experience the benefits with a 15-day free trial of FLFE today. No credit card required. If you'd like to get in touch with me, be a guest on the program, have a guest suggestion, or want to provide feedback, just click the contact button on our website at veritasproject.com. Thank you for listening to The Veritas Project, because you don't want to believe, you want to know.